At 9:47 on January 14, 2026, in the freezing waters west of Greenland, a bright red alert flashed across the monitoring screens at Pitufik Space Base. The source was impossible to ignore: the 33,000-ton Russian nuclear-powered giant Arctica cutting through the ice and pushing deep into Greenland's exclusive economic zone, only 18 kilometers from the capital, Nuuk. It was a direct breach of sovereignty and a bold signal aimed straight at NATO's position in the Arctic. Danish command responded at once, ordering 2 F-35 fighter jets from Thule Air Base into the air for an emergency intercept. But as the aircraft closed to within 50 kilometers of the target, both jets lost satellite navigation at the exact same moment. Russia's Murmansk BN electronic warfare system had come online, creating a powerful jamming field stretching roughly 100 kilometers and leaving some of the world's most advanced fighters disoriented in the Arctic sky. And yet, that was only the opening move. A far more dangerous setup had already been prepared by the Russians, and only one force had any real chance of turning the situation around. A hidden presence moving quietly in the background, one even Moscow may not have fully accounted for. But before stepping into the most intense confrontation of 2026, it is worth stopping to understand why this happened at all. On the wider geopolitical board, Russia's move was anything but random. It was carefully timed to achieve several strategic goals at once. Moscow acted during a highly sensitive window just before February 2026, when President Trump was expected to reduce NATO funding. By turning the Greenland Sea into something resembling a second Crimea-style pressure zone, Russia was trying to establish a dangerous gray area precedent, where international law could be stretched for military advantage. At the same time, it was an opportunity to demonstrate the appeal of Yasen-M submarine technology to its strategic partner, China. Most importantly, however, the operation was meant to disrupt the U.S. plan to modernize the Golden Dome radar system at Pitufik. Russia wanted to send a clear message. If Washington moved forward with a new missile shield, the Arctic, right on America's threshold, could become an active zone of confrontation. Back at sea, the loss of the F-35s forced NATO to rethink its response immediately. Fortunately, a major asset was already nearby. The Royal Navy's Type 26 frigate HMS Glasgow, one of the West's most advanced anti-submarine warships, was conducting combat exercises off the coast of Nuuk. On board was the Type 2087 passive sonar system, an extraordinary piece of technology said to be sensitive enough to detect even the faintest underwater signatures from remarkable distances. In a confrontation where visibility had collapsed and the skies were no longer reliable, that silent advantage was about to matter more than ever. The order came through and the ship reacted immediately. It broke off its exercise pattern, pushed to top speed, and headed straight for the disputed zone, stepping in where the Air Force could no longer operate. When the Type 2087 passive sonar picked up an echo roughly 8 kilometers away, the commander of the British vessel chose a warning action under the rules of engagement. A Mark 54 lightweight torpedo, set to a non-explosive mode, was released into the water to generate a powerful acoustic shock meant to drive the opposing force back without escalating further. But NATO had badly misjudged how ready Russia was. The moment the Mark 54 cleared the tube, alarms erupted across HMS Glasgow. The warning system lit up with a chilling message: torpedo in the water, bearing 300, and it was not coming from the surface vessel Arctica. The source was far below, nearly 150 meters under the sea. Waiting there was the Kazan, a Yasen-M class nuclear-powered attack submarine and one of the Northern Fleet's most advanced assets. It had likely been hidden in position long before the British ship arrived. The Russian commander did not pause for instructions from Moscow. He answered instantly, following a strict tit-for-tat logic. A heavy 53-65KE torpedo was launched, not configured for a full strike, but set instead to trigger a proximity detonation at close range. Seconds later, the ocean erupted. A towering column of water, nearly 30 meters high, exploded upward just 400 meters in front of HMS Glasgow. The force of the underwater blast from the 2-ton Russian torpedo was vastly stronger than the British warning shot, generating an immense wall of water that slammed into the ship's bow. The impact shattered the composite sonar dome mounted at the front of the vessel. In one moment, Britain's most advanced warship lost its underwater vision. HMS Glasgow, a flagship of modern naval technology, was now effectively blind beneath the surface, drifting through hostile waters while the real threat remained hidden below. What had already been a serious crisis suddenly became far worse for coalition forces. As HMS Glasgow struggled to recover, maritime radar picked up 3 more contacts approaching from the north. These were Okean-class Project 22,100 border patrol ships operated by Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB. Each around 90 meters long, they advanced in a broad horizontal line, moving to block the British vessel's path toward the port of Nuuk. From Moscow's point of view, it was a highly calculated move. These ships were officially classified as law enforcement vessels rather than naval combat ships. Under Colereg's Rule 18, NATO warships could not simply treat them as standard military targets or force their way through without creating a major legal and political crisis. And while those surface ships formed a visible barrier, the most dangerous element of all was still moving silently below. The Yasin M-class submarine Kazan continued to glide at a depth of 150 meters, a level that carries major tactical importance in Arctic waters. Down there, hidden beneath the cold layers of the sea, it held the advantage, unseen, difficult to track, and in the perfect position to shape everything that happened next. It was operating just beneath the thermocline, the boundary layer where sharp changes in temperature and salinity create a natural acoustic shield. In these conditions, sonar waves dropped by NATO sonobuoys could bend and reflect upward instead of penetrating deeper water. Signals that should have reached the seabed were being thrown back toward the surface. To NATO's remaining sensors, the Kazan had effectively disappeared. The balance of the battlefield was now brutal and clear. British forces were trapped on the surface. Russian submarines were hidden below. The airspace was heavily disrupted by electronic jamming. From every angle, momentum seemed to be shifting toward Moscow. Now imagine yourself in the position of the NATO admiral, with a British warship disabled, enemy vessels closing in, and no clear visibility below the waves. What would you choose? Launch a full-scale counterattack and risk a global crisis, or withdraw under pressure and allow Russia to dominate the region? It was the kind of decision that could reshape the entire Arctic. Washington had been watching every stage of the confrontation and concluded the moment for action had arrived. Russia's behavior was no longer a gray zone standoff. It had crossed into a direct attack on Allied military assets. At nearby Pituffik Space Base, American personnel quietly activated a new over-the-horizon radar network known as REL-6. Unlike traditional radar systems limited by line of sight or vulnerable to local interference, REL-6 used the ionosphere to project scans across immense distances, reaching as far as 3,000 kilometers over the ocean. But its true advantage was a next-generation AI signal processing system designed to cut through noise and isolate tiny anomalies. It could search for the faintest surface disturbance caused by a snorkel mast or the pressure trace created when a 13,000-ton submarine moved beneath the water. The data collected at Pituffik was then transmitted through a secure, very low-frequency communication link, one of the few systems capable of functioning through Russia's jamming environment. Even with the protection of the thermocline and its stealth profile, the Kazan could no longer remain hidden. On American radar displays, the submarine appeared as a narrow scar across the ocean surface near coordinates 72 degrees 16 north, 55 degrees 32 west, with an estimated depth of 220 meters. The contact report was sent immediately to a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon aircraft launching from Thule. To avoid the jammed GPS environment, the crew relied on inertial navigation systems, guiding the aircraft without satellite signals. Now the pursuit had truly begun. But when the Poseidon received the coordinates, it did not rush to fire. The crew understood exactly what they were dealing with. The Kazan was not an ordinary target. It was one of Russia's most capable underwater platforms. A rushed strike could fail. What they wanted was something far more powerful than damage. They wanted psychological dominance. Instead of deploying a scattered sonar screen, the P-8A Poseidon used a far more deliberate tactic. It released 88 AFD-SV active sonobuoys in a precise checkerboard formation, creating a sealed perimeter around the Kazan's last known position. Working together, the buoys emitted multi-static sonar pulses from multiple directions at once. Sound waves struck from every angle, cutting through water layers that normally protected submarines and reducing the effectiveness of the Kazan's stealth coatings. The trap was closing. The moment the aircraft's combat system confirmed a target solution, the weapons bay opened. A heavy Mark 48 AD cap torpedo dropped into the sea, but this weapon carried a crucial advantage. It was wire-guided, meaning acoustic jamming would have little effect. A weapons officer aboard the Poseidon maintained direct control as the torpedo raced downward toward 220 meters at roughly 55 knots. Then came the move no one expected. Instead of detonating on contact, the Mark 48 charged straight at the Russian submarine and turned away only at the final moment, slicing past the Kazan's sail at less than 50 meters. The scream of its water jet propulsion thundered through the hull like a warning from the deep. In submarine warfare, that kind of message is unmistakable. We know exactly where you are, and we can end this whenever we choose. But the captain of the Kazan was experienced enough to understand both the threat and the opportunity. Inside the command compartment, he refused to surface. Instead, he ordered immediate emergency evasion procedures. Within seconds, the submarine launched 12 MG-74 hydroacoustic decoys. These were not simple noisemakers. They were advanced deception devices designed to imitate engine signatures, propeller rhythms, and even sonar reflections consistent with a Yasin-class nuclear submarine. In an instant, the Poseidon's tactical display transformed. Where there had been one confirmed target, there were now 13 red contacts scattering in different directions. At the same time, the Kazan executed a hard turn, powered down its engines, and drifted silently toward a trench on the seabed, hoping to merge with natural seismic background noise. Russia had shifted the battle into a contest of signal discrimination, real contact versus false contact. For a brief moment, the American crew faced genuine uncertainty. Their AI-assisted system was suddenly flooded with deceptive returns. If they attacked a decoy, the Kazan could escape and reclaim the advantage. But planners in Washington had already considered that possibility. They moved to a detection method deception could not easily defeat: magnetics. The P-8A descended to only 60 meters above the ocean surface, a highly dangerous altitude in blizzard conditions. The pilots stabilized the aircraft as the crew activated the MAD system, magnetic anomaly detector, mounted at the rear of the plane. No matter how advanced the MG-74 decoys were, they were still relatively small metal devices. The Kazan was something entirely different, a 13,000-ton mass of reinforced steel moving beneath the sea, even in total silence, even hidden on the seabed, even with engines shut down. It could still betray itself by bending the Earth's magnetic field everywhere it passed. Strong magnetic anomaly detected, bearing 310, real target confirmed. The shout from the P-8A weapons officer ended the illusion. The Kazan's hiding place was no longer a mystery. This time, the Americans chose not to use a torpedo. Instead, they released a compact device known as a SUS charge directly above the submarine's position. It was designed to generate a sudden, powerful underwater acoustic shockwave, delivering a brutal sensory strike without immediately destroying the vessel. Inside the Kazan, the effect was overwhelming. The blast rolled through the hull like a hammer blow, shaking the entire submarine and temporarily overwhelming its sonar systems. For the crew, it felt like the deep itself had turned against them. Instruments were rattled, orientation was disrupted, and in those dangerous underwater conditions, that kind of confusion could become fatal within seconds. Surrounded by unseen ridges and rough terrain beneath the sea, the submarine could no longer stay hidden safely. One wrong movement in the darkness and disaster was only moments away. At that point, the standoff had effectively been decided. One of the Northern Fleet's most formidable submarines had been cornered by a combination of Western detection systems, layered tracking methods, and relentless pressure. Realizing there was no safe path left below the surface, the Russian captain made the only decision that could preserve his crew. He ordered an emergency blow, forcing high-pressure air into the ballast tanks to bring the submarine up immediately. At 10:45, the frozen surface of the sea split open. The dark hull of the Yasin M-class submarine rose out of the water in the middle of Denmark's exclusive economic zone, fully exposed in daylight. For a nuclear submarine, being forced to surface in hostile waters is one of the most serious possible humiliations. It is also impossible to explain away. In that moment, the violation was no longer deniable. With their underwater cover exposed and the situation collapsing, the icebreaker Arctica and the 3 FSB border patrol ships abandoned the pressure operation and turned back toward Russian waters. In Brussels, NATO officials could finally breathe again. The confrontation had ended without a wider military spiral, but the outcome left hard lessons on every side. Britain's Type 26 frigate had to be taken back for major repairs, costing millions of pounds. Europe was reminded just how vulnerable its security framework could become without high-end American technical support in a crisis. And in Washington, the Pentagon understood that even a tactical success came at a price. Key elements of Pituffik's over-the-horizon radar capabilities, along with the anti-submarine containment tactics used in the operation, had now been revealed at least in part. So while the immediate clash was over, the larger contest was only entering a more dangerous stage. The Arctic is no longer a distant frontier. It is becoming a testing ground for power, technology, and political resolve. And after this encounter, both sides now know much more about how the other reacts under pressure. The game is far from over. It has simply entered a harsher and more complicated chapter.